Welcome to another in our series of Kehillat Israel podcasts. This is a recording of Rabbi Amy Bernstein's weekly Friday morning Torah study.
We are in Parashat Chaye Sarah this morning, the first part of Chaye Sarah, chapter 23 of the book of Genesis. We are in the aftermath, if you will, of the Akedah. So we're in the aftermath of the binding of Isaac. For many of us, that story, is paradigmatic of Rosh Hashanah and of a test of faith. In the last few years of my life, I've really focused, partly through Aviva Zornberg and her looking at that story, I'm much more focused on Isaac after the Akedah. For me, it's not so much about Avraham. It's about Isaac and Sarah. So that's partly what we're going to talk about this morning. Abraham's, kind of story reaches its pinnacle with the Akedah. That's kind of the big end of kind of his faith narrative. There's huge consequences to Abraham's quote-unquote passing of the test, right? So for the rabbis, this is the paradigmatic act of faith. This is Abraham passing God's test, and is a moment of great achievement, for Avraham. For many of us, it is a very disturbing text. It remains a terribly disturbing text.
Why, he paid too much for the cake?
No, the Akedah, the binding of Isaac. So the being willing to sacrifice his son, raising a knife with his son tied to the altar. What does that mean for Isaac? What does that mean? That your father is ready to slit your throat because of his understanding of what God calls him to do. So that's not our story for today, the Isaac narrative. But it is for the rabbis Sarah's story today. So we are dealing with the aftermath of the Akedah in two ways. One is the rabbinic midrashic tradition about Sarah and how the Akedah impacts Sarah. And the other is that because this was kind of the pinnacle of Abraham's faith journey, if you will, what we're dealing with then now is the the end of the story. The end of the story are these details, not that they're insignificant, but they're details about what now, right? How to close that story of Avraham and shift to the next generation, to Isaac. And so two concerns remain after the Akedah. One is with mortality, like how does one deal with the fact that if you're really going to be here in the land of Canaan, people are going to die and you're going to need to deal with that. And the other is posterity. How do you deal with making sure your line is going to go on? Avraham, who's been told he's going to be father of a great nation. He's got one son who is, as yet, unmarried. So as Avraham comes, out of the Akedah, comes out of that kind of the apex of his faith journey, we get the kind of last parts of what needs to happen, which is to deal with the mortality of the family and the continuation of the family. Both of those are addressed in our Parsha. That is really what our Parsha is about. It's the epilogue, if you will, to the Akedah.
Before that, though, how did they deal with death? They just buried people where they died?
That is traditionally what you do. You bury someone where you die. Because you live, where you live, you die, and you bury your beloved. He's a resident alien in Canaan. He's not from Canaan. He's not a Canaanite.
Right, but why wouldn't they think they would just do the same thing? When people die in Canaan, they're going to bury them there.
Because you have to own the land. So we're going to go there. We're going to see that story. But every Jewish community, the first two things that were established anytime Jews moved anywhere were what? Mikvah and cemetery. And there's actually three things. Mikvah, cemetery, and...
Synagogue.
Yeshiva.
No.
Food.
Local delicacy.
Close. A shoichet. You need a shoichet. So you needed a cemetery, you needed a mikvah, and you needed a ritual slaughterer so that you could eat meat.
And there was a fourth
Yeah?
that came up in modern times, and that was like a Jewish family service.
So, that's a very late innovation, because otherwise Jews, just kind of helped Jews. If they were starting a community, they helped each other. So those three things have always been necessary. So some of the older things, you don't need a synagogue. You can take a cheder, you can take any room and study Torah, and then daven. You do not need a synagogue. You can use somebody's living room to study Torah.
It was fairly common in New York in the early days. They called it a shtibel, which means a small house, but it's a room in somebody's home, and they 1 week would be here, 1 week would be there.
Right?
That's how Chaye started.
As a shtibel?
Yeah, in different people's homes.
So many shtiblach.
And they would transport the Torahs to the different homes?
Oh, there was no Torah.
You don't need a Torah. You don't need a Torah. You need a copy, right? And
We're not studying from a Torah.
that's right.
Scroll.
That's right. And if you wanted to have services, you don't need a Torah in order to daven together, to pray together as a group, as a chevra.
And even when we had a shul, it was very often it's somebody. The rabbi lived behind the front room, which was the sanctuary.
Yeah, halavai. I should have an apartment here in KI. It should only be, right? It's magnificent. So when we read this beginning part talking about Abraham acquiring the cave in which to bury Sarah, this is not just a throwaway, oh right, she died and he asked her. This is a very serious and significant part of the Abraham narrative. This has to happen for a couple of reasons, and we'll look at that as we look at the text. We're going to look at if you look at the end of chapter 22, chapter 22, verse 19, is the end of the story of the Akedah, right?
103.
Page 103 in the green, in the Women's Torah Commentary.
121.
121 in Eitz Chaim. Chapter 22, verse 19, the very end of the Akedah. Somebody want to read verse 19 in English, please?
Abraham then returned to his servants, and they departed together for Beersheba, and Abraham stayed in Beersheba.
What's missing? This is the end of the binding of Isaac. What's missing here?
Isaac?
Isaac. We know, those of us who study Torah together, we know now that if something's missing, that is an engraved invitation to the rabbis. Yes? To say, there must be a reason. It doesn't say Isaac. Torah doesn't make mistakes, God forbid. Right? The Torah narrative knows they both went up the mountain together. Any ideas where the rabbis are going to go? Where would you go? Why is Isaac not mentioned here?
I would not go down the mountain. Hey, Dad, what do you want for lunch? I would be upset. I'd take off.
Sarah's not mentioned
So she's not there.
She wasn't there.
So Isaac has just almost been slaughtered by his father on the altar, right? And it stops with the knife raised. So does Isaac hear the angel say, Abraham? We don't know. All he knows is he sees his father with the knife. He's tied he's tied as you would tie a sacrifice. His knife is raised. That's the image he has of his father. Before his father instead turns around, sees the ram, we have no idea how that unfolds. But you can imagine what he's going to say, okay, son, I've changed my mind. Even think about what that conversation would look like. Does he help him off? Does he use the knife to cut the ropes? And then say, come here, we're gonna sacrifice the ram instead? whatever transpires next, one can imagine that Isaac is not coming down the mountain with his father because presumably he has just been seriously traumatized.
Yeah.
So the same silence that we get for the 3 days that they're walking, right? Remember, it's a journey of 3 days to Mount Moriah, right? 3 days, not one word recorded in Torah between Abraham and Isaac, other than the story we have at the very end of, okay, we got the wood, right? We got everything. Where's the animal for the sacrifice, Dad? Don't worry, son, God will provide, right? That's the only conversation we have. That's it. That same silence, it's bookends. It's a beautiful literary, right? Bookending. Also on this side of the story, there is silence. There is not one word between Isaac and Avraham in this episode after the binding. So one explanation is that we only have Avraham here because Isaac's just not going to hang out with him, right? He's gonna be on the mountain processing, calling his therapist, and doing what he needs to do to take care of himself. What's another place the rabbis might go, or another tradition might go?
Well, Isaac could have gone back to Sarah, and Sarah's not. I know Sarah's not there, but Abraham doesn't come down from the mountain and go back to his wife.
Okay,
Ostensibly.
Could
Could Isaac have gone home?
So they're 3 days journey,
Right.
Right. So he comes down the mountain and comes back to his servants, and they departed for Beersheba, where Abraham stays.
But Sarah wasn't there. He didn't go back to his wife.
We assume he did.
Well, afterwards.
Afterwards.
Yeah.
But I mean, after this whole thing, he didn't. It wasn't like, oh, he did this and he immediately went back to Sarah.
Well, we just
to tell her what
right.
happened.
So Sarah's not. What happens with him and Sarah is not here. But hold on, the rabbis have a reason for that. That's where we're going next.
Yeah,
Richard, what did you want to say?
Well, there's based on your introduction, the existing midrashic tradition would have to be sort of the rabbis' attempt to make Abraham look good,
Yes.
right? But because the midrashic tradition, if I'm sort of paraphrasing, some people said that Abraham sent him to Shem to study Torah.
Of course.
They remained there
Of
3
course.
years. And
You went to a yeshiva.
Also, another view in the midrash is Abraham sent him at night, sent him on ahead at night so that the evil eye wouldn't see him. And there's also, as part of this same midrashic tradition, the reason why Sarah dies.
Okay. Wait. So stop there. Another interpretation that I find incredibly interesting is the midrashic tradition that says that the reason Isaac isn't mentioned is because he actually sacrificed him.
Oh, come on.
So there is a tradition where he essentially commits the act, which is a very interesting, right, psychological, I think, reading of the father-son dynamic. And in Islam, it is Ishmael, right, who's the one on the altar. So there's lots of different narratives about why Isaac isn't here. What?
Back up. Really?
Really?
In Islam?
Then that makes
Yes.
the angels sound like moose.
Ishmael is his oldest son.
Yeah.
So they also have a version of this story, which they have reconstructed, which is that Ishmael is the one that he takes to Mount Moriah, which is where the whole mosque is now, right? Is for them the Dome of the Rock, that mosque, that spot, is both where Ishmael was on the altar and where Muhammad alights. Yes?
I was going to say, if you look at a mythical story, part of it, is that the sacrifice of the Isaac is often as a dog or as a father. We have to somewhat kill the infant, the very difficult child in us, and be aware of it. I think it's more of a mythical story than anything else.
Which is why I think there's an impulse within the mythic imagination. There's an impulse to read he's not here because the child had to be killed for Isaac to then become the adult. And mythically, the child died, because whether you want to believe he actually slaughtered his son or not, and of course our tradition is that he did not, let's be clear. Our tradition is he did not, that the message of the whole story is don't do that. But the temptation to read his absence here as Abraham going through with it, I think is a mythic impulse to say, well, of course the child Isaac died there, because now we're going to get him starting his own family and becoming the patriarch. And for sure, whatever innocence Isaac had left, forget what the knife actually did, right? The fact that he was on that altar and Abraham raised the knife, already Isaac's childhood is over. In that moment, his childhood is over, right? Because innocence, trust, naivete, boom, gone. He sees who his father is capable of being in a way we can assume he never has. And the mythic truth of that is when we become old enough to really see who our parents can be, right? The dark shadow side of what their own vision of what needs to happen, what that means we have to sacrifice. What will it cost us as their children?
Wouldn't it be a fairly current interpretation of losing one's childhood figuratively? Isn't that sort of 20th, 21st century?
I think it's always been the power of this story. I think the story remains in our tradition because on some level we get it. Now, are we using different help me finish that word.
Psychobalance.
That's what I'm thinking, but are we using psychology and those terms differently? Of course. I don't, the myth of the father and the son and killing or sons killing, that's not new. That goes back as far as there have been parents and children, right? I think the power of that is eternal in human society. Linda?
Look at it from the other side too. It's symbolic of Abraham letting go of his child, recognizing that his child has grown up.
There are absolutely infinite ways for us to talk as parents, as children, right, about what the Akedah is, which actually we should probably do some Rosh Hashanah. Maybe I'll give a sermon on it some Rosh Hashanah. Hang on, Mickey. There's infinite ways to explore that story. I want to move us to the aftermath of that story, right? So one is about Isaac, which I said we weren't going to explore, which we've now been exploring, and that's my fault. But the other one is, as Richard alluded to, is Sarah, right? So we're going to go there now. We're going to remember that this is the last part of the Parsha from last week for the rabbis. It is never an accident what comes next, right? It's never, okay, new story, new scene. Always it's related. Why is this episode immediately after that episode? Always. Because Torah is true for all time. Torah is not just about the pshat, about the actual literal meaning. Torah is a vehicle through which we understand ourselves and life. Right? So there has to be more meaning than these are next to each other because they are, right? There has to be some other meaning. So let's go to what the rabbis see. Someone start at verse 1 of chapter 23.
Sarah's lifetime, the span of Sarah's life, came to 127 years. Sarah died in Kiryat Arba, now Hebron, in the land of Canaan, and Abraham proceeded to mourn for Sarah and to bewail her. Then Abraham rose from beside his dead and spoke to the Hittites, saying, I am a resident alien among you. Sell me a burial site among you that I may remove my dead for burial. And the Hittites replied to Abraham, saying to him, Hear us, my Lord, you are the elect of God among us. Bury your dead in the choicest of our burial places. None of us will withhold his burial place from you for burying your dead.
Okay. So we're going to go to this parsha is called Chaye Sarah, because the first words are Vayiyu Chaye Sarah, and they were the days of Sarah. And they were the life of Sarah, because Chaye is Chaye, it's plural in that sense of, remember we talked about the depths, right? Me'ash shana, 100 years, ve'esrim shana, and 20 years, be'sheva shanim, and 7 years. Shnei Chaye Sarah. These are the years of Sarah, of the life of Sarah. Okay, so immediately we get, after the Akedah, the description of the death of Sarah. So Bert alluded to the fact that we don't see a reunion between Abraham and Sarah at the end of our story. We just get Abraham coming down and returning with the servants to Beersheba. Nothing else is said. Next thing it's said is Sarah has died. So in the Midrashic tradition, it's because there's lots of ways that the rabbis go at it. There's lots of versions of the story. But the story is that that an angel, in a lot of cases it's the prosecuting angel, right? So a version of Satan, the prosecuting angel, comes and finds a loophole through which he goes to Sarah and tells Sarah that Abraham has her son on the mountain and is offering him as a burnt offering to his God. Oy, Linda Rubin says. So, what do you think, Linda, then the Midrashic tradition says about why Sarah's dead here? She's heartbroken. Her heart literally stops. Her heart breaks. The suffering of her son, right, is too much. And Sarah can't do it. And she's gone.
I read it as some time period past. It's a new chapter, and she's dying at age 127.
Reuben, you are staying at the very pshat. You are not swimming deeply today. Dive deeper. Torah is true for all time, about all things. Therefore, what is of course the pshat is sometime later, right? But we got to go deeper, or what are we doing here, right? So we're going to go deeper, and for the rabbis, they talk about, this saying that's popular that God never gives you too much to bear. God never gives you more than you can bear, and then other people say, I wish God didn't trust me so much, right? But this tradition, this Midrashic tradition says that is absolutely not true. This is a Midrashic tradition that says there are things that are so horrific that some folks do not survive them. The Piagetchner rabbi wrote a very moving commentary on this. The week before this text was, the text of the Shabbat, his son was killed, right, in the ghetto. His son was murdered. He then approaches the Akedah and the death of Sarah immediately following. And I can't, even last night, I teared up just even trying to hold those two things. A person of faith and hope, a teacher, a gentle, loving, wise soul, coming to this text, having watched his son murdered by Nazis, by hate, by the worst of what we human beings can do to each other. How does one even come to this text? And yet, he had such an incredibly loving approach to exploring that. And I think to myself, therein lies the glory. That even times where we feel like we should die, somehow the best of humanity is that we find some way to move forward. We find some way out and forward into life and into learning and into love and into relationship. And for me, that remains probably one of the biggest miracles of being created, both part of this natural animal kingdom and a little bit of the divine.
In a different text that I was reading, they were explaining Sarah's death is that she heard that Isaac was going to be sacrificed, and then she heard that he wasn't sacrificed, and the juxtaposition so close together is what killed her.
Yeah, the shock, the double shock. He's dead, and then he's not dead. So it's another version of that the shock can kill us. Sarah?
There's another shock, and that's recognizing who her husband is.
Oh,
Do you want to go back to live with this guy who's ready to kill your son?
I think that's a really important point. That's a really important point. And
Because she could have lived to 128.
right? And that broke her heart. Because that's another take on that midrash, is that she finds out what her husband is capable of in this new religion that she's followed him from, right, another place that they were familiar. They went on this whole big journey because he was going to be in relationship to this Yud-Hey Vav-Hey business. She takes it on. She goes with him. They're going to be the founders of this new, and this is what it looks like. This is what we gave up everything for? A God who could ask for this? The shock. And they've been partners. Abraham and Sarah are partners in this business. The whole tradition is very clear about that. That they are co-equals in this leadership of what's not yet the Jewish people business. And to find out who your partner really is, or is capable of being, the shock and grief of both of those.
I was just wondering, is there any significance they say she lived 100 years, 20 years, and 7 years? Why don't they just say
Lovely
27?
and close reading. A lovely and close reading, because it says she lives 100 years and 20 years and 7 years. Any guesses? Oh, wait. Then read to me what it says after that.
These were the two lives of Sarah.
Well, these were there's another, isn't there years again? These were the 100 plus 20 plus 7 years. These are the years of Sarah's life.
Before and after she had Isaac.
So the rabbis, in good close reading tradition, have to ask, why did it just say 127 years were the days of Sarah's life? What is all this business about 100 plus 20 plus 7? So they say, at even 100, Sarah remained as beautiful, as innocent, as happy, as hopeful as she was at 20. Before Tzuras, before infertility, before leaving home, before all these things, we can assume at 20, she was beautiful and live and happy and optimistic and joyful and innocent. So she remained, and as beautiful and innocent as a 7-year-old. All the way through Sarah's life, even when she gets here, right? That's why years is repeated here. All of them, in every age, in every era of her life, it was the same. That she remained that innocent and that joyful and that present and all the things we can imagine being at 20 and at 7, even with all of the things she suffered. And for the rabbis, this is a teaching. This is a very important teaching. Is that we're supposed to be like Sarah. We're supposed to try to figure out how to find the good in everything. And we're supposed to try to figure out how it is we can stay soft and present and innocent and beautiful and all that stuff, no matter what life brings us. And that is the core, central, spiritual challenge. And she is the matriarch. She is the paradigm of that way of being in life and that way of being in the world.
Is there any commentary on the fact that maybe Abraham, and neither Abraham nor Isaac ever went back to Sarah? And she was left alone?
I don't know.
Because there's a hole in the story.
I don't know. I've never heard one. I've only heard they don't go back to her because she died. She's dead. She finds out and she's dead. But I've never heard one that they didn't go back to her, that they left her.
A question about Ruben's comment that we sort of read it, that there was perhaps a span of time. The breaking the Torah up into Parashat came much later. Did it
Yes.
not? And it was rabbinic. And so
For them, there's no chapter break here.
So actually, if you read it, I mean, there is no break here.
Right. There's no
So the
division
break
between one parsha and the next.
Purposefully. Okay. Well, but it really wasn't there.
Right. I mean, to support Reuben's reading, it says sometime later, Abraham was told, right, blah, 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 blah. So it is, of course, sometime later that then we get that Sarah's lifetime had been. But because it says they were, her years were, we don't know how long ago this death happened. It doesn't say, and she dropped dead on the spot. She could have died when she heard about the Akedah, right? And now we're just being told about it. Her years were, it doesn't say when she died. So, both are there, and you can fetch it both ways.
It was the next sentence.
It was, right.
The break got added later.
Yes, absolutely. And to Bert, to your point, I've never heard a midrash that says they didn't go back to Sarah, they left her. But the reality is Isaac leaves after this. Isaac moves away. Isaac moves away and he's done. Linda?
For a clue to the fact that Abraham might have come back and reading the JPS, after she died, he goes to the Hittites and says, I'm a resident alien among you. So to me meaning that perhaps he'd been there for a while.
Oh, for sure. Right. But I think Bert thought she might have bought a condo. He might have bought a condo in the next neighborhood over.
If he didn't want to go back.
If he didn't want to face her.
It just happened, honey.
Because can you imagine that conversation when he does come home?
And she said, by the way, where's Isaac?
Because Abraham rose from beside his bed.
It's like,
Is there a part that says that Sarah knew what happened?
No. It's rabbinic. The rabbis read, why is her death told to us right here, right after the Akedah? That's an invitation to say maybe, right? For the rabbis, maybe, and that's where they go, is maybe an angel came and told her what was happening, and that's why she died.
There's also the fact that just right after the Akedah and right before Sarah dies, the birth of Rebecca is mentioned.
Oh, sure. We got to have that.
Well, right. And because there's also rabbinic tradition that you don't have the righteous of one generation dying off before a successor is...
So Rivka has to be born before Sarah dies, because she's going to be the new Sarah.
Right.
There's another commentary here about the 127 years.
Yeah.
And that is that 120 is the ideal.
And Sarah lived 7 years past the ideal. Sure, beautiful.
And 7 is a magic number.
Of course. We know that. Yes, right, Ruben? We know 7's the powerful magic number.
I was thinking about what you were saying about the rabbi who lost his son in a pogrom, and that Jews have been sacrificing their children unwittingly, not intentionally, since the beginning. Abraham got to keep his son, and I just thought...
It's interesting you bring that up, because the medieval tradition, there's really painful, I can't even read it. It's gorgeous, it's so painful, I can't even read it. The medieval commentators say, Abraham got to keep his son. We didn't. Our children's blood is running in the streets. Our children's blood stains the pavement crimson. He kept his son. You said no then. Where were you? Who's Avraham? Pshan Avraham. His son lived. We are the ones who are sacrificing.
Isn't it so also that when it comes to our own personal faith, we need to become Abraham, which is the, since we are father and mother, our own children. Yet, when it comes to faith in God, we have to keep that innocent type of a surrendering, and when you believe in God, you need to have that kind of a, not childish, but what I'm trying to say is that when you have to faith in something, you have to give up, and you have to become like a child. You're faithful like a child.
You have to at least
keep that part of it, and yet you still have to have that mature type of.
You have to move past the cynicism of the pain that the pain of being an adult can cause. Right? That by the time you're an adult, there's so much accumulated pain and disappointment and sorrow and loss and betrayal that what happens is we tend to, as we get older, harden. Right? This is the core of Jewish spiritual teaching, is we tend to harden. We tend to put a fence, a wall around the heart. And then we're cynical. And that is what keeps us from the very thing that will heal us. And so it is a return to that place of the earlier part of our experience. It was open. And it was open to God. It was open to the divine in all things. That understood the mystical and the magical and the awesome in all things. Right? That we lose that as we become adults, which is part of what the rabbis are doing with this. With 120, 100 plus 20 plus 7 is that Sarah somehow was so good a spiritual practitioner that she was able to stay like 7 even at 100. But yeah, I think it's exactly. Mickey?
It could be also she was renegotiating at 100 years old. And if she was given 100 years, renegotiating another 20. Because remember, she was getting a son after all those years, and the love of having a son, why die at another 20 years, another 7 years?
Lovely. So at 100, she had some things happen that were pretty momentous, and we older parents know something about the ways we are now invested in life and in the future and all those things that didn't happen before we had children, right? We just felt like we were getting older and getting old. Now there's a renewed youth and vigor and desire to live, right? An engagement with life that happens after she has Isaac. Beautiful. Linda?
Was Isaac only 7?
When?
No, he was 137.
No,
I mean, he was 37 on 100. 37 when the Akedah took place.
So,
He wasn't a baby.
you shouldn't be so ready to say how old he was at the Akedah, because you think there's one rabbinic tradition about how old Isaac was at the Akedah? God forbid. God forbid, right? There's all kinds of readings and calculations and doings of all of this, that he's 15, that he's old enough to carry the wood, but he's not so old that he's going to resist his father. There's some that say he's 37, so he agreed to the whole thing. There's some that say he's 7, so he doesn't have any idea what's going on, right? So it's a little...
Also, so much of this discussion assumes in biblical times people thought and analyzed the way we do now. I think that's assuming a lot.
In what way?
Because we've all had the benefit of so much pop psychology, just so much. They didn't have it then. They probably thought very differently in many ways.
So it was okay to sacrifice your son, and Sarah would have been fine with that?
How could Sarah go live with her husband after he almost killed his son? Maybe in those days, women, they never questioned their husband. They just went.
So let's say that's true. Let's say that women didn't question their husbands in an absolute patriarchy. He's just almost sacrificed her only child. She has no choice. She doesn't question because she has no alternative in that society. Okay. Do you want to talk to me about her inner life? That's what...
She didn't have an inner life. Who knows?
Human beings have always had an inner life, right? So that I think that
so different. Their experience.
Human beings have never, I don't believe, been people who, if their son was brought to an altar by their partner and almost offered, there is no woman on this planet who would not have suffered extraordinarily. None. You look at, and I'm being very serious, I'm not being sarcastic. You look at videos that they're doing now of animals, it is very clear that animals have emotional lives. And that they know when they're young, when something's, elephants, right? Mourn the death of one of their own. If that's happening in the animal kingdom, I know, so I can't imagine a time when human beings, this story is mythic. It's about Myth, which is about what's always been true, what's true now, what's always going to be true. What levels at which we talk about it, what we draw from that, all of that is, of course, is going to change by generation, by what we're exposed to in science and culture and all of those things. The thing that makes Torah powerful for all time is that it's mythic. It talks about eternal human truths. For me,
I know something about Sarah's life, that she went to bat for Isaac and she wanted him to be the one to, and got rid of Ishmael. I mean, we know that she was going to bat for her son, So she did have an inner life. She was able to express her will to her husband. So, I mean, she wasn't just a blank character. We actually do know something about her life.
And if they were considered co-equals in this journey, she had to be able to express what she was feeling and, her reasons for following.
All right, so...
Rabbi, I just wanted to say the first time I ever heard about this 120-year business was my mother-in-law, who would say...
Ad mea v'esrim.
Ad
mea v'esrim, 120
years.
Right.
Never knew where that came from.
So she said it in Yiddish, right? She said in Yiddish, right? You should live to 120, right?
Right. When that's that is coming from that.
How do you say it in Yiddish, Margot?
120 year. Where's the Yiddish?
Our expert resident Yiddishist, right, has just said it so beautifully. One more time, Sarah. You should live to 120. Amen. Ken Yeratzon. All right. So we get that she's in Kiryat Arba. Now Hebron. This is where we're going to have the site of this. So keep Hebron in your mind, right? In Canaan. We're not going to go through this whole thing because we've spent a really long time on what I said we were not going to talk about. So I don't want to go through all the intricacies of the deal that's here, which is actually very elegant and lovely and interesting. So Abraham rises from his dead. So we are clear that even here there's ritual around sitting and being in the presence, right, of the one who has died. This idea of sitting, right, this idea of being low, right? He rises from beside the dead. Some read into this that we've been sitting for a long time as our mode of expressing grief when someone dies. We sit by them, right? And spoke to the Hittites. There's lots of discussion about who these folks are, the Hittites, what they're doing here, what his relationship to them is, but we're not going to go there. He says, I am a ger toshav, right? A ger v'toshav. I am a resident alien, or an alien and a resident.
Here it says foreigner.
Okay.
An alien who became a resident.
So he's a foreigner. He's an alien who became a resident. He's there. And he says, I need a burial site, right? Sell me a burial site that I may remove my dead for burial. So we go through a very intricate discussion, which if you look at is interesting about negotiations and how you do that carefully. It's very clear that Abraham wants to buy this burial site. It's offered by the folk here. He does it in front of all the people. He does it in the gate, so it has to be public. He wants to buy it, and he's told, take it as a gift. It's a gift. You don't need to, right, to buy it. And he says in verse 9, let him sell me the cave of Machpelah that he owns, which is at the edge of his land. Let him sell it to me at the full price for a burial site in your midst, right? For full, in Hebrew it's full silver, for the full silver price. And Ephron, the guy who owns it, answers him in front of everybody. So now it's public, which means it's official. And he says, or it might be this is an official body that represents, the Hittite authorities. He says, no, you know what? I give you the field and I give you the cave, verse 11, that is in it. I give it to you in the presence of my people, bury your dead. So he needs a permission, municipal permission to bury. He's given that permission right here. Take it. You can take the field, take the cave, you can bury your dead. He's given municipal permission, but Abraham's not going to stop there. Abraham bows low before the people of the land, right? So he's being very respectful. He is being very elegant. He is not obsequious. He says, if you would only hear me out, this seems to be a legal phrase from the ancient Near East, meaning he's going to give a kind of testimony or a request of the court. Let me pay the price of the land. Accept it from me that I may bury my dead there. And Ephron replies in this very interesting way, my Lord, hear me. What is a piece of land that's worth 400 shekels of silver between us? Right? So staying, what is that between us? Go, bury your dead. So what Ephron's just done is, without insulting Abraham,
set the price.
Without opening a bargaining conversation, Ephron has just set the price.
But wasn't this a standard way of polite negotiation at that time?
Particularly for Abraham, who was a resident alien, because you couldn't own land. And this is an important point that you bring up. In the ancient, which explains a lot about today's situation. In the ancient Near East, and it continued in the cultures of the ancient Near East, as today what we would call the Middle East, land is more than where you live. Land is everything. Land is about posterity. Abraham's purchasing of this cave is not just to have a place to bury Sarah. It's to have a place.
A stake in Canaan.
A stake in Canaan. This purchase means he trusts that there will be progeny for Isaac. And it is his responsibility as the patriarch to be sure there's something for Isaac. We know Abraham is a very wealthy man, but it's not enough to leave portable wealth. If you really want to take care of your posterity in the ancient Near East, you have to give them land, place. Once you do that, it's permanent. Abraham does it publicly. He wants to pay the full price, not rent it, not loan it, not a gift, all of which can be challenged later. Abraham is doing more than buying something here, right? He's becoming something different than a resident alien in certain ways. He now owns, it's his for posterity, this piece of Canaan. And the reason it has to be so public and so official and so whatever is because the Hittites are loath to give it up. When you have land in this culture, in this mindset, you don't want to sell it. You're really not allowed to, right? That whole idea that you shouldn't, because that's going to water down somehow the ties between people of that ethnic group, and it's going to weaken the society if you start selling in perpetuity land to an alien and their offspring in perpetuity. So that reluctance of them to sell to Abraham, his insistence that he have something that they don't want to give him in order to give it to his posterity, this is what we're still dealing with in the Middle East. And anyone who does not understand that does not understand the first thing about the conflict. Why can't they just give land, don't give land, blah, blah, right? Why can't they just live over there in this other place? And why can't they give this for that? And that is crazy talk over there. That is American Western thinking. And it's in some ways, I have a background in cultural anthropology. It's insulting to the culture of the Middle East to say, why can't they just move and build a city over there? Why can't those people just go over there and then swap that for that? It's insulting to say, what's the problem? Right? Why? Because for thousands of years, people trace their identity to the land that was their ancestors' land. We Jews get it. Why are we bothering with Israel? Why do we care? Why don't we're in New Jersey. Who cares about this tiny little country in the Middle East that's in such a bad neighborhood? Why care? Because we get it on some level, right? But sometimes we don't have the ability to see how other folks in the region have the exact same strong, intense relationship to an identity that is rooted in that land.
The same way.
It's the same land. And so that's the problem. Why not over there? Why can't they just? Because there's that same ancestral clan relationship to that territory that's being disputed. It's this old. And it's this powerful that it's still going on how many thousands of years after this text is written. I'm not saying that to say anything about any sides. I'm saying we do the whole situation a disservice if we don't understand the power of the relationship of peoples to their land, particularly in this
Is Hebron in the
region.
occupied territory?
I'm sorry?
Is Hebron in the occupied
Aha,
territory?
thank you. So, because I said to Robert that he was reminding me of something that now, Reuben, you're exactly right. So he buys this burial plot. Sarah is the matriarch. Abraham is going to be buried there. Isaac is going to be buried there. Rebecca will be buried there. Leah will be buried there. Who won't be? Rachel. Rachel dies
Side of the road.
on the side of the road, giving birth to Benjamin. But all of the other patriarchs and matriarchs are buried in that land. There is every reason to believe, therefore, that Hebron was a shrine, even predating Israelite society, that was a shrine of the founding, right, kind of matriarch, patriarch that might have had semi-divine status at some point, who knows, but it's a very old tradition, likely, that Hebron, that place was a very holy place, venerated by the folk in the neighborhood as where their mythic ancestry was, which is fascinating to me that it remains, right, a place of great contention, because Jews still have an understanding of the power of that site, as do, there's different versions, obviously, in the neighborhood of what Hebron's about. But 3,000 years later, we're still, we have soldiers stationed around stuff at Hebron, so that, right? Because it's that big an issue still. Did I see a hand, Diane?
What I'm trying to say here is that even myself, I come from the farm, we had a huge farm, and we sold the farm. Every time I go back east, see my family, we all go and visit the place that we live to this day.
Right.
And I go there and I tear up because this is my youth. This is a place where, and all of us are relating to it. And sometimes we go by the river and we picnic there. For some reason or other, we are so attracted. It's been a long time. It's been sold over 50 years ago.
And in Hatikva, we say Shnot Alpayim. For 2,000 years, we've been thinking about that farm. For 2,000 years, 3 times a day, we remember that farm that your family sold how long ago, right?
Even my husband, when he goes back to Monday, he wants to go back to the house where he was born, when he went to school, where his grandparents were, etc., etc.
Right.
We are very attached to the land or to the place.
Isn't it more like 3,000 or
Yeah.
more than that?
No, Shnot Alpayim, 2,000 years refers to since the destruction
Okay,
by the Romans in 70.
we're not talking about.
This is 3,000. When I said Hatikva is about, it's been 2,000 years since the land was taken.
Yesterday, Jews went to that cave of Machpelah to honor her yard site.
Right? It's so incredible.
It's
incredible.
It's amazing.
So this is a piece that I've had for years by someone named Nina Woke, bearing witness to the impossibly distant. You have to remember that he's buying this cave for a son who's unmarried, right? So he has no grandchildren. And he's buying this cave trusting that there's going to be posterity to worry about giving land to. All right, so let's look at the very bottom paragraph of your sheet that I just gave you. She starts talking about Israelis and Palestinians and, the hope for peace, but it doesn't look likely, all that stuff. And this is a long time ago because it really doesn't change, unfortunately. We can pick it up anytime. But let's look at the bottom paragraph where it says, it wasn't within Abraham's power to hurry those descendants into the world or to give them land. It was within his power to make sure that whenever they came, they would find an inheritance from him, a pilgrimage site calling their attention to the land to which Abraham has devoted his life's effort. Many centuries later, in the month of Tishrei 5761, with Israelis and Palestinians once again becoming enemies, news stories grimly reported the silence of the peace movement. Let's drop down. And she talks about, she's talking about Arab and Jewish women coming together to at least speak out against war and have that spoken out loud. This letter broke the silence. It didn't end the war. But, like the conference that took place within weeks to unite the Israeli and Palestinian peace movement, it bore witness that some contemporary people could, like Abraham, imagine a different future. Impossibly distant, but not impossible. This is Zechut Avot, the merit of our ancestors. Their faith in a vastly different world to come, which let them take even small steps towards it. This is the merit of the generation who were freed from Egypt, when they were still slaves in a land reeling from sickness, famine, and darkness. They acted in unison on what is still called the Great Shabbat to prepare for the night of the Exodus. This is the merit of Jeremiah, who, when in prison for treason during wartime, insisted on buying back legally and in front of witnesses a piece of land that had been sold out of his family. In a country about to be conquered by the Babylonian military machine, with every expectation of being killed or deported, he bore witness to an eventual return and restoration. This is the merit of the fighters in the European ghettos of the Holocaust, who, with no hope of winning, bore witness that it should be possible to fight ultimate evil and win. This is the merit of all who now, accepting the horrible reality of war, knowing the goal of mutual trust and sharing to be more tragically elusive than ever, still ultimately plan for peace. Our ancestors knew that the future will be different from the present, as the present differs from the past. Although their unaided efforts could not bring about the future of their dreams, their merit was to treat those dreams as eventual goals, leaving signs and guides for those yet to come. It has been the merit of our ancestors to treat despair, even when apparently necessitated by events, as a luxury our people can never afford. May it be our merit as well.
Is he related to Herman Wood, the writer?
I don't know. But I think for me, the closing message is with very little evidence that there would be a people, with very little evidence that there was a future there in Canaan, even though he's dedicated his whole life, right, to, well, the later part of his life, to that mission. Avraham takes the first step in acting as if. And that I think for me, that is the constant challenge. It is easy for us to see the news and say, you know what, it's too big. It's a mess, and there's nothing we can do. It's learned helplessness. It's the way we throw up our hands and say, so I don't have to do anything, because I can't solve world hunger. And I can't make world peace happen. And I think the teaching for both Avraham and Sarah were that they took the steps that they could, acting as if. And that is the reason we are sitting here around this table in this chapel 3,000 years later, still Kehilat Yisrael, the holy community of the people of Israel.
You've been listening to Rabbi Amy Bernstein's Friday morning Torah study from Kehilat Israel in Pacific Palisades, California. For more information, go to our website, www.ourki.org.